Welcome to the Freedom to Learn podcast. I'm your host, Ginny Gentles. This season, we're diving into what it means to return education to states, communities, and families. And we're exploring what becomes possible when education is freed from union dominance and federal control.
We are guilty in many of our schools, not all of our schools, but still in many of our schools, of doing things the same way we've always done them and getting the same results we've always gotten.
Education pioneer Julie Young joins us today to share the story of the creation and hockey stick growth of the Florida Virtual School, the country's first statewide fully online public school. We discuss how her innovative mindset, her relentless advocacy, and her willingness to embrace performance-based funding launched a new approach to student-centered education and expanded educational opportunities across Florida and beyond. Florida Virtual School was launched as a grant-based pilot program, providing online classes to 77 students back in 1997. And today, it offers 190 courses to over 230,000 students statewide. This didn't just happen. Julie and I talk about the role leadership played in fostering innovation and funding mechanisms. We discuss navigating resistance from school districts. And of course, I ask her to distinguish between established, high-quality virtual programs and the awful emergency Zoom schools during COVID-era school closures. Julie Young began her career as an elementary teacher. After leading Florida Virtual School for 17 years, she served as the managing director of ASU Prep Academy and ASU Prep Digital School. She's the co-editor of a new book, Virtual Schools, Actual Learning, Digital Education in America, and the author of an upcoming book, Say Yes, How Virtual Became a Reality. Julie Young, welcome to Freedom to Learn.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, I am very excited to be talking to you. I am from Florida. I grew up in the Orange County public school system, and I was the director of the Florida School Choice Office at the Florida Department of Education at the end of the Bush administration. And so I know all about Florida Virtual School, and I want everybody else to know all about Florida Virtual School. It really is an honor to have you here today. You're often called a pioneer in education innovation. I think you refer to yourself as an edupreneur. I'd love to hear what those terms mean to you.
You know, when I think about the word pioneer, you think about forging forward. You're really in a situation where the future is unknown. The next step is unknown. When we started Florida Virtual School, when I took the job, I was handed a 2-page concept paper, and it was for a web school, and it was a $200,000 Break the Mold grant, which out of the Department of Education. And, I was new to Orange County. I had moved there, just recently from Lee County, and I had had a lot of ed tech experience. And when I got the call to come downtown to talk about this grant, I called my boss and he said, you've got all this experience with ed tech. They probably just want you to collaborate on the grant proposal. And so about 20 minutes into that conversation, I realized I was in an interview for this thing called a web school. And I asked the question, is this an interview? And Dr. Bob Williams, he said, it is. And I said, the only thing I know about high school is what I can remember. And I was elementary administrator. And he said, that's exactly why we would like to have you for this position. We want somebody to come at this with fresh eyes and with student eyes, and for the students who are not all about the pep rallies. And, my comment was, okay, as long as I know I have your support, then I'll do it. So when I think about the pioneer part of it, that always comes to my mind because, it was a classic case of going home, telling my husband, and him looking at me like I was, a green alien going, you took the job? And I said, I'm going to. And he said, how do you think you're going to develop software? And I said, I don't know. I'm going to call my friends at IBM because I had been working with them through the school system, and get in a room and see if we can't figure this out. So there really was no roadmap. There was not an example to point to. And the greatest thing was Frank Brogan, the commissioner at the time. He looked at me when we first met and he said, "Julie, nobody knows how to do this. Um, Use your best judgment, go make it up, and come back and tell us how to do it." And then he said, "You don't have to follow any of the rules, just don't hurt anybody." And so, yeah, it was just a blue ocean, a blank slate.
Julie, I want to remind our listeners what technology was like at this period, because we're talking 1996 or so for a launch in 1997. I graduated from high school in the early 90s, and education technology was the computer lab down the hall, which, to be honest, I kind of long for those days. My kids are
Yeah,
way too much on their Chromebook now, but
yeah.
this was not the period that we're in now by any stretch of the imagination. I, why a web school? Web school? Like I heard you say it was for students who don't like the pep rally. Who were you trying to serve with this school?
Well, I think it's important to note that the two-page concept paper was written by a teacher, a computer science teacher. And she, we were at a time in Orange County Public Schools where the schools were very overcrowded and computer science teachers were, needle in a haystack. And so she actually went to Dr. Williams and said, if I could teach this over the internet, this new thing called the internet, I could teach kids in other schools and we could give kids more opportunity for computer science courses. And so that really was the impetus in Orange County Public Schools. We have overcrowded schools. We have students who cannot avail themselves to high quality courses. And in Dr. Williams' mind, he was very focused on what he would call the disenfranchised students. And that could be students who don't like the pep rallies and, representing the students that school is just not their thing. But it also was for the students who had left the system and become homeschooled. And, there was a whole movement in Alachua County at the time um, around the fact that it was a very rural district and many of their schools did not have AP courses or honors courses because they could not attract the teachers. They just did not have the teachers to teach those courses.
Wait,
And
Alachua County, isn't that where Gainesville is? You would
that
think
is
that
where
the university would have helped with that, but that's not necessarily the case.
it just wasn't the case at the time. And so Bob Muni was our first board chair, advisory board chair, and he was in Alachua County, and they had homeschooled all their kids. And he went to the uh, uh, leadership in Alachua County and said, you know, we could do this really cool thing that could serve homeschool kids. And they said, well, we also need help with these advanced placement courses. So it was kind of a conglomeration of ideas about the students who were not the mainstream students where school worked for. So it's homeschool movement. It was a need for being able to deliver high quality courses and high quality teachers to every student, regardless of their zip code, and we led the nation in that for sure.
So, Florida Virtual School is referred to as the nation's first fully online public school. But what you're describing would be courses that are being offered to students, right? Rather than like a full enrollment into the Florida Virtual School.
So initially, when the grant was awarded, there was a brief moment of, okay, we're just going to do, advanced placement and honors courses. And when we started developing, that's kind of how we mapped our development schedule. And then we started to find that, especially our homeschool students, they were very interested in having their school, and this could be their school. In addition, so we started thinking about, okay, this could be a school. The difference was, though, that we were also in this situation where the school districts, even though we were not a threat at the time because we were a line item in the budget, so we were not taking money for the students that we served from the school districts, and we did not for 6 years, and we can talk about that later. But the school districts were fearful of Florida Virtual School. They also were not only fearful, they were skeptical. How could you really teach kids in an online environment? And why would anybody in their right mind want to do this with their children? So we took the tact of, okay, we're not going to be a school right off the bat. Maybe we'll never be a school because we didn't want to compete with the school districts because we were really working on this, relationship building so they would allow their students to take the courses. It was not until 2008 or 9 that we actually became a full-blown school where a student could actually graduate with a diploma.
The initiative was born of a school district. You're saying Orange County Public Schools launched this with what, 77 students initially? And then I hear you talking about Alachua County, but there's 67 school districts in the state. So some school districts weren't so on board at first. And I would imagine there are other forces at work too. Florida is a right to work state, but there are still teachers' unions. Teachers' unions are often skeptical of anything new and that might challenge the system. So perhaps they had concerns as well. Julie, people outside of Florida and other arenas where you've operated might not realize what a force of nature you were and just how well known you were in this era as the Florida Virtual School grew and built into what it became. So you weren't just operating within Orange County. You weren't just talking to other school districts. You were very active in the Capitol, convincing state legislators what was going on. When did that start? To go from being like an elementary education teacher to being recruited to launch this web school to becoming an incredible force for change in the state capitol. Like, how did you realize, hey, I'm going to have to engage state legislators in this process?
So, first of all, I think it's really important to mention that I did not have a career map. I started as an elementary school teacher. I had no designs on being a superintendent. Just wanted to go to work every day and teach my kids. I loved my work. I'd forget to bring my paychecks home. My husband would kind of go, this is not a volunteer job. I just love the work. But I did take the approach of saying yes when opportunity arose. And I, kind of went, yeah, you know what, I'll try this. And so that really was kind of how I literally ended up in this space, was by saying yes when an opportunity arose and then trying to surround myself with people who would help me. Very aware of my capabilities and my gifts. And I'm also very aware of the fact that no one does these things alone. And I surrounded myself by people who believed in this mission and could be helpful. When we started, and it was, the initial $200,000 break the mold grant between two districts, there wasn't this idea that we were going to be going to the Capitol and asking for more money. We were part of these two districts. We had gotten this, grant, and we had started this program. And it was very quickly that we learned that, wow, this does not have to be contained between Alachua County and Orange County. This could serve students all over the state. And so just as we're trying to fill the void of advanced placement or computer science in our districts, there are needs all over the state. And then comes Governor Bush, and many times he's been referred to as the education governor. He was
A well-deserved title.
a well-deserved title, and he was incredibly interested in this project, in this program. And when we met the first time, what was very clear is that he was determined that every student in the state of Florida should have a high quality teacher and a high quality course offering in order to graduate with a high quality education from Florida. And this could be the vehicle that could enable all students in the state of Florida to have that quality education. So it was probably a year in. It was quick that my time in Tallahassee became frequent. And initially, it was really about talking to legislators about the fact that um, this really could work and that we could restructure teaching and learning in such a way that every student would, in my words, have a front row seat and an individualized teacher and academic program. And so those first 6 years, as you may remember, um, which was really Frank Brogan's idea, was until we have to, we are not going to take money from the districts. We are going to fund this through the state so that you have the opportunity to design the program, fail fast, restart, figure out what this thing should look like. And then once it has been established as an authentic way of learning, if need be, then we would figure out how to fund it through the state education, through the Florida FEFP. And lo and behold, I think it was 2003 that the class size amendment passed and everything zero budgeted that were line items. And we were faced with the question of, okay, how are we going to fund this thing?
Class size amendment. I'd forgotten about that. And that was a constitutional amendment that passed that did cap class size and left districts scrambling with how to comply. Because as you mentioned, there were areas with or who already had overcrowded schools. So when we say the Florida Virtual School started with 77 students and it grew and it grew and it grew, that didn't just happen. You were working closely with the Commissioner of Education. You were working closely with the governor. That Commissioner of Education became the lieutenant governor. You had leadership in Tallahassee understanding and supporting this mission, and then I guess eventually the legislators as well. What was the growth trajectory? Like, it's huge now, and now every student in Florida has to retake a Florida Virtual School course.
So
Is that right?
that that component of the law was abolished, I believe, last year.
Okay.
And I think that really was about the fact that digital education, virtual education is so immersed in Florida education that it was no longer required. I actually consider that one of my greatest accomplishments back in probably 2011 when the law was passed. I think it was 2011 that every student would need to take a course to graduate, a virtual course to graduate from the state of Florida. And the reason for that, Virginia, is very personal. My kids were in a private school for high school, all public school up until that point, based on a lot of circumstances. But they were not interested in taking one of their mother's courses. And so they graduated from high school having not taken a Florida Virtual School course. Off they went to the UCF, and very large
The largest, I mean, it's
university.
immense today, but it's always been
Yes,
big.
yes, yes. And both of them, 3 years apart from each other, as a freshman, were placed in online courses because the other courses were full.
Mhm.
And, as most universities do, they make sure their seniors have what they need to graduate, and then it works its way down to those new freshman students. And so they were placed in courses, um, unbeknownst to them, that were online courses. And they had no clue how to take an online course.
Interesting.
And and they failed. Both of them failed their first online courses. Again, 3 years apart, different circumstances. They both graduated beautifully in the end, but it was really about the fact it wasn't about the course. It was about the fact they didn't know how to take that course. And so we really put forth the fact or the argument that every student should understand how to take a course. It didn't matter whether it was chemistry, algebra, or um, outdoor living, we would create courses that were of high interest to students for electives. And our students would take those courses so that they would learn how to learn in an online course. And that was really the basis for that law initially passing.
When we talk about district opposition or this requirement that was in place for a while, there were there are district franchises too,
Mhm.
right? Like it wasn't just this one thing
Right.
housed in Orange County. It became this multifaceted thing with these district franchises. Could you talk a little bit about that process? Was that born out of trying to get the districts on board, or did
Yeah.
they come asking for this?
A little bit of both. And so, when we first started, as I mentioned earlier, it was super important to us that we create this relationship with the districts in order to serve the districts. I called it a co-opetition model. We were doing everything we possibly could to serve the districts. At the same time, we were obviously having to focus on our own survival. And so, what would that look like? Well, we had Broward County jumped in really early, and there was a woman by the name of Mary Ann Butler Pearson. You may or may not have known her. She was responsible for their kind of ed tech effort in the district. And there was a school down there that was really interested in Florida Virtual School virtual learning, and they were having difficulty finding. I think it was world history at the time, and for this particular class, it was a big school. And so we provided their world history program at the school. And kind of a year later, I said to Marianne, I said, our mission is not to save you money and uh, provide, the education experience for your entire world history program. We're here to serve the students who are underserved, the schools that can't find teachers. You know, I'm a little concerned about this. And so she said, well, what if you taught us how to do what you do? And what if we partnered? And we set up our own little mini Florida virtual school here in Broward County. And that's really how it got started. And so she and I kind of, dreamed and schemed and said, okay, you know, McDonald's. What if it's really important to me. And we use this phrase all the time in our speech, around the office is the hamburger has to taste the same. And so we literally sat in a room and designed what is now known as the Florida Virtual School Franchise Program. Program was designed in such a way that um, we trained every single teacher, every single leader. We did not do a training the trainer model. We did that free of charge. We would bring them to our offices in Orlando. If for some reason they couldn't travel, we would go to them and we would ensure that they were being trained in the exact same way that our teachers were being trained. And it was a very low cost. It was a cost recovery model. We charged $50 a student per semester. To put that in perspective, when we started offering courses outside the state of Florida, that number was more like $350 initially per student per semester. So it was totally done in a collaborative manner with the districts. And the other thing that I wanted to have the input of every district. And so when we started to hire teachers outside of Orange County, um, my goal was to have a teacher in every district. And that teacher, that program that we designed was set up and modeled after how I worked in Lee County with the school district and IBM. That was back in the 80s. And I became a trainer for them with the courseware that we had used in our school for a couple of years. So it was on loan. And in that model, IBM paid my salary and the school district continued to pay my benefits. And so we did the same thing for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years with the districts. We paid their benefits, and the school district maintained their salary because their salaries were all different. And so we had a teacher in almost every district, and those were the districts that started first with the franchises.
Right. So we're talking a Florida virtual school, public school, and these are public school teachers licensed to teach in Florida.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So where are we right now when we're talking about the growth of the franchises and the timeline? What years was this?
The franchise, uh, actually, we started playing with that in 2000, 1999, 2000. It was pretty quickly. It was very early on, because Broward, obviously, Marianne. And one fun fact, Marianne's son had started to teach with us, if I'm not mistaken, and so she had really a bird's eye view to what this actually looked like in real time. So she was a real believer. So it did start rather early.
Well, and her perspective would have shown her that it's a benefit for educators who like teaching through this model too. So we've talked about creating this around the students, but also there's a benefit to educators who get to innovate as well. I want to make sure we land the funding conversation. Ultimately, the Florida Virtual School did move under FEFP. How did it end up landing?
Yeah. So back to your question about Tallahassee, the $200,000 was for the first year.
Yeah.
And so year two was like, oh gosh, we got to go back and ask for more money. Now, mind you, Orange County, Alachua was involved initially. We're kicking in dollars. We could not have run the program on $200,000. So it was a grant to the districts to get us started, and incredibly grateful for all of the support that came. Again, Bob Williams was our champion back then in Orange County. Um, so every year we would go back to the legislature and we would ask for money. And it was really based on, we would set goals, we would go back, we would testify, we would demonstrate and show, okay, here's the money we had. This is what we did with it. And here are our outcomes. And early on, from probably the first year, we made sure that we had students and parents also come with us to talk to the legislators to testify if necessary about their
Mhm.
experiences. So that went on for 6 years. Initially, that first, batch of money that came after the $200,000 dollar grant, I'm trying to remember, I think it was called Project Orange in legislation. Dan Webster at the time, who was a key legislator, as you know, can't remember at the time whether he was Speaker or whether he was President of the Senate. I think he was President of the Senate at the time, but he was in Orange County. Obviously, he was representing Orange County. His grandchildren were all being homeschooled. He was a huge believer and a huge advocate for students and so forth. So um, he became an early advocate and friend to the program. But again, this went on for 6 years, and it was a different funding level every year. We didn't know what we were going to get, so we had to plan around that. Lo and behold, 2003, as I mentioned, all the line items basically zero budgeted, um, because of the class size amendment. And at that point, it was like, what are we going to do? So Maxwell was at the governor's office. He was the budget director, I believe, and John Wynn was at the governor's office, and he was the policy director. I had not met them, but I received this phone call from the two of them, and they're like, "Hi, Julie. This is Mark and John. We work in the governor's office. We need to come up with a funding plan for Florida Virtual School." And the big question was seat time. That was the big question. We had designed this program around students. We had asked all the what if questions. If we did things differently, what would change? And everything changed. But the biggest thing that we were super proud of was the fact that we were able to teach those students individually. They did not have to start on the same day, end on the same day. They didn't have to fail because we could give them more time. They could advance when they were ready. That was a key component of the program. And we knew if we went to a seat time model, which is how all the districts were served, that we would lose that. And so that was my big thing is you guys got to help me figure out how do we do this so we can maintain this model and not be forced into a seat time model. So lo and behold, the performance-based funding model appeared. And what that means in plain terms is if our students were successful, we were funded. If they were not, we were not. And so, they asked the question, are you willing to do this? It would be groundbreaking. It could serve as a model for education, nationwide. And, do you believe in the program and the work you're doing enough to actually take this risk? How do you say no to that question? You kind of go, uh-huh. And then you go back and go, I got to figure out how to do this.
Yeah.
Um, it was the most groundbreaking, important piece of change that occurred within the program because it changed every adult's attitude. And, we were still small at that time, gathered people together and said, here's the deal, guys. We have a choice of seat time or we have a choice of performance-based funding where if our students achieve, we achieve. And every single one of them was like, we want the performance-based funding model. And so even if a student, there are some things I would tweak today. It's kind of like if you knew then what you knew now. Um, we had students who moved out of town and we had taught them for 8 months. We didn't get any funding for them because they didn't
Oh,
finish
well.
with us.
Yeah.
We had students who were ill and passed away in the middle of their experience. We didn't get any funding for those students. And so I would tweak it a little bit today to make sure that we, had some funding to support the startup of a class. But I have so much belief in that model and was super hopeful that other virtual schools would latch onto it because it was the right thing to do, but it was hard and it did not catch on outside of Florida, but Florida maintained.
Well, you used the word risk as you were explaining this, and I would not say that the public education system, whatever the mechanism, is particularly oriented towards embracing risk. So that might be something unique to Florida Virtual School and its leaders and staff from those earlier years. Julie, I was all on board for Florida Virtual School, both from the perspective of someone who, again, is from the state and saw how it unfolded from the capital's perspective. But also, I have friends whose children have benefited, and it just worked so well for them to grab a course here, or grab a course there. It just it served those students' needs. And then COVID happened. So I'd like for you to, like, as we're wrapping up, to address what Zoom school is or was to those of us who, as parents, were like, oh my gosh, my child is falling so far behind. They are not being educated by this Zoom school thing, versus what the Florida Virtual School vision was and model is. Like, I do wonder if we need to distinguish between an established entity and approach versus what families endured during the COVID era school closures.
Yeah. What has become known as Zoom school, I think it was, it has turned in a little bit to a blessing and a curse. Obviously, we all know the curse. Um, a well-designed virtual school would never put a student in front of a screen for 8 hours a day, for 6 hours a day, for 5
Right.
hours a day. Even Florida Virtual School. One of the things that when we designed the program, depending on the age of the student that would be in those particular courses, there was a percentage of time that they should be offline and online. And I would always say to our staff, our development team, it's super important that our courses push students away from the screen. That could be a whole nother podcast in what is a high quality program and what is not. One of the things that was so disappointing to us, I was at ASU Prep Digital at the time. We were new. I had gone to ASU to start that program in 2017. So here it was, 2020. We were only a full-time program there, whereas Florida Virtual School was 90% part-time and 10% full-time when I left, maybe not even 10% full-time. So we were full-time. We had about 870 students at the time. When COVID hit, I had a very, very experienced staff. Had brought with me a very experienced team, and our team was like, "We can do this. We can do this. We can scale like no one else can scale. We know how to do this." So we dug in very quickly. We were part of a network of charter schools, and so there were I don't know, about 11 schools at the time, I think, between all of us. We moved all our schools into the digital program within a few days, within the first week they were working.
Wow.
And so our brick and mortar schools were able to capitalize on the knowledge and expertise of our digital school. And we were able to transfer that knowledge, and we were able to use, the similar techniques, et cetera. And we had decent success with our brick and mortar schools. We had good success. We had 95, 96% attendance. The rest of the country, we were so incredibly disappointed that every state at the time, almost every state at the time, had a successful virtual school of some sort that they could point to. May not have been a state virtual school like Florida Virtual School, but it could have been a successful virtual school like ASU Prep Digital, which was part of ASU but served the whole state. And almost none of the states capitalized on that expertise. I was very disappointed in the leadership because I felt like the leadership at the state should have gone to these schools, should have gathered them on Zoom immediately and said, "Okay, let's put our heads together. You are a state asset. How can you help us help them so that these students do not lose their academic time to COVID?" And that just didn't happen. What did happen is many of the students and the families that were in high quality programs or had joined high quality programs because of COVID had a pretty daggone good experience. And there were parents that, had never planned to have their kids home learning, who were actually able to observe the learning process and they liked it. There were also many parents who did not have high quality programs who were also observing a very poor, low quality education experience with their students. And so, what we all know what happened. There's like 1.5 million students who have left our public education system since COVID. We can't find them all. There was such a focus on the platform and not the pedagogy.
Mm.
Um, we're focused on Zoom. Um, it was just so unfortunate because it was treated like, and it was emergency education. And instead of designing it as a legitimate long-term model that, seizing the moment to create a high quality program for the district. We did have the opportunity through ASU Prep Digital to work with districts who were willing to really buckle down and design some, high quality programs for their districts that then did continue after COVID. So, yeah, I I I think I had hoped also that we would learn that lesson, and I don't think that we have learned that lesson as a country.
Well, you have co edited a book, Virtual Schools Actual Learning, Digital Education in America that addresses a lot of what we've talked about today, and I think provides a roadmap for like, hey, don't do it like you did during the COVID era. Here, state legislators and policymakers, here's a roadmap. Here's a better approach. Do I have a right sense
I
of
think that's a great descriptor.
what are you hoping that they take away from this?
I think an understanding of, this didn't happen because someone just flipped a switch. There was 30 years, 30 years of people who were putting their heads down and designing what virtual program, what digital education should look like.
Right.
And I think the other thing that's really important is if you look at, our schools and, 9 out of 10 presentations you see at a conference have the picture of the school building in 1920, and the classroom and the picture today. And, we are guilty in many of our schools, not all of our schools, but still in many of our schools of doing things the same way we've always done them and getting the same results we've always gotten. And I think what was really important to me when you talk about being a pioneer, I was given the opportunity by incredible leadership in the state of Florida to, I don't want to use the word experiment. I think it was more of, let's try this, let's try this. We worked with our parents. Our parents knew that this was new. Our parents knew that we were trying something new. We would say to our parents, we're trying something new. You got to let us know if it's working or not. But we had the opportunity to change things. And as we scaled, which was a hockey stick scale after year 2, for the entire 17 years that I was there, when you're dealing with 800 students and then you're all of a sudden dealing with 4,000 students overnight, you have to change things. You have to look at how you're doing things and you have to change things. And so the book really does go through how the sausage was made. And I think it's good for leaders to know, this wasn't just somebody just woke up one day and went, oh, let's do it and let's do it this way. There was a lot of research that was done. I would always tell our team, we're going to invite the outside in. And we want all the eyes we can have on what we're doing and all the feedback that we can gain. That, again, I think goes back to the leadership in Florida, having the confidence and giving us the ability to make mistakes and quickly remedy and pivot and refocus. So, it's a great book in terms of really understanding what went into this industry that we all have in our life today.
Well, so again, that book is Virtual Schools, Actual Learning, Digital Education in America. You've also written a book, Say Yes, I believe, that tells the story as well.
That book is coming out hopefully in the spring. It's not there yet. The name of the book right now, it could change with publishers, but the name of the book is Say Yes, which is based on my philosophy of taking risks and saying yes to opportunity, how virtual became reality. And it really is my story.
How can people follow your work and be notified when this book comes out?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm easily found on LinkedIn, and my website is julieyoungeducation.com.
Well, Julie, thank you for your commitment to education freedom and innovation and serving students. And thank you for joining Freedom to Learn.
Thank you, Virginia. It's been a pleasure.
Freedom to Learn is a production of the Defense of Freedom Institute. Learn more about our work at dfipolicy.org. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Send feedback, questions, and episode ideas to podcast@dfipolicy.org. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please follow and review Freedom to Learn on your favorite podcast app and share it with a friend.